When you tell the truth, you tell things that only you can tell. And ultimately, no one can compete with you in being you. Tell stories that only you can tell. Don't conform, have an adventure, and remember there's only one you on this planet. Yo, Zenith Nation, welcome back to Catch The Zenith, the podcast where I document my journey to get better in life and business. Today we've got another episode of Zenith Reflections, where I comment on some of my most interesting posts from the week on X, formerly known as Twitter. And by the way, if you're new here to this podcast, I'm Nicola. I'm currently building an AI startup while also writing my master's thesis in startup entrepreneurship. With that said, please share and enjoy. First one. There isn't anything better that can happen to you than what happens if you tell the truth, no matter what it looks like to you in the moment. And I'm paraphrasing or quoting here Jordan B. Peterson. This is a quote from one of his recent published podcast episodes together with Stephen Bartlett from the Diary of a CEO. And there they speak, among other things, about relationship stuff. And it's a really, really interesting conversation. I highly recommend that. And one thing they cover there is telling the truth. Now, why is telling the truth an interesting thing to do? First of all, is because we don't know the outcome if we tell the truth or we tell what we think to be true. But on the flip side, we can frame that a little bit more positive and say then, okay, we don't know the outcome. However, we also know there can be a wonderful adventure on the other side if we start telling the truth, if we truthfully say what we actually think, which is sometimes pretty challenging because we are not 100% sure what we actually think. But at least approximating that can be, I believe, so valuable. And this adventure that lurks on the other side is incredible. And I remember listening to another podcast episode together with Andrew Huberman on the Huberman podcast and Jordan B. Peterson. And Peterson said something like, hey, and I'm hugely paraphrasing, but let's have a truthful conversation or basically let's speak the truth and see where it goes. Let's have an adventure. And I found that so inspiring because on the one hand side, it's so scary, but then on the flip side, the outcome is a beautiful adventure, or part of it is that. And I came across a quote from Chris Williamson where he also speaks about telling the truth. He wrote something like, tell the truth. The more I focus on this, the better my life gets. The more truth I tell, the less afraid I am, and the more my life improves. Tell the truth. And one of the key takeaways here, I think, or why this is powerful is basically when you don't know what to do, the best thing that you can do is speak or tell the truth, because that's the only thing that's on your side, or among the few things that are on your side. Because imagine you're in a difficult situation, maybe in a heated debate, or you're arguing with someone. If you start lying, it makes everything way more complicated because you need to remember so many different things that you said that are not true. But if you constantly tell the truth, it makes everything so much easier. It's like when you lie to people about different things, you need to remember that. And maybe you forget and then they will see, I got you. You actually lied to me. And this is something what we don't want. So the best thing, long story short, what we can do in difficult situations is just tell the truth. And it is scary and makes us uncomfortable, but what else should we do? What is the better alternative? I don't see any for that matter. And really, one of the key points here is really, if you're going to tell the truth, you're going to have an adventure because you don't know what the outcome will look like. There's a beautiful quote also from Chris Williamson. I really like his content. He wrote something like, never lie. Whether by omission or commission, lying degrades your virtue. Your internal sense of self-worth is keeping check, even if you aren't. Telling the truth is a superpower. It works for everything. Start being radically honest today, and your life will change. So there are different components to it by telling the truth. It's not only when we interact with other individuals, it's also when it comes to telling the truth to ourselves. Because if we over and over lie to ourselves, I believe our mental health can definitely suffer and we betray ourselves. And the same, obviously, or similar stuff can happen if with other people, like when we lie to other people. In the end, I would say it also translates to again to our mental health, because we always take check of that. We always know when we are lying, and I don't know. At least if I lie, I feel terrible. There is like an inner thing that tells me this is wrong, and I don't know. I would imagine if you would lie all the time, how terrible you would feel. And I think some people are going through life like this, and this is definitely not a long-term strategy to achieve anything in life that is sustainable or should be sustainable. It doesn't work, I believe. And there is another quote from Chris Williamson where he said, "The secret to dealing with people who imitate your work, there's only one way I know to beat people who copy you. Get bigger. It's not through direct conflict, but by making them shrink into irrelevance in comparison." So he basically quoted Alex Hormozy, and I'm quoting Chris Williamson just to be fully transparent here. And why I'm bringing this up? So telling the truth is not a general life strategy that's pretty sustainable, I believe, but also it's interesting when it comes to content creation like I do here on this podcast. Because when you tell the truth, you tell things that only you can tell. And ultimately, no one can compete with you in being you. Tell stories that only you can tell. Don't conform, have an adventure, and remember there's only one you on this planet. And I found that so empowering, realizing that, okay, what would I say if I don't care about anything? I just care about the truth. And the outcome looks by an order of magnitude perhaps different than what you would say if you think about all the different people and thinking about what they would think about you. And this is a great content hack by simply saying stuff that only you can say. And how you tell the truth. That's and so powerful. And I would argue that because sometimes people bring up like, hey, I don't have anything unique to tell on my podcast or my social media or whatever it might be, like any content thing. But I believe everybody has something unique and interesting to tell because everybody has experienced some kind of story, some kind of experience that is completely obviously unique to them. Nobody has lived their life. And the truth here is so powerful. But a lot of people conform, I would say, to certain things. So they don't speak or tell anymore certain or don't share anymore certain things, which is totally fine. Everybody can do whatever they want, obviously. But I'm bringing this up because some people say like this person is so interesting. I'm not that interesting. I have nothing to tell. But I believe you only have nothing to tell because you conform to certain social norms that you put into your DNA, and now you have maybe a boring life. Let's quote unquote boring life. You don't have, but you conform to certain things. But if you make more and more your own analysis and you tell what you actually think, the more you approximate, I would say, the truth, or at least you start to embody that principle of telling the truth. Let's put it like that, if that makes any sense. So, to wrap up the first post of today, so we remember there isn't anything better that can happen to you than what happens if you tell the truth, no matter what it looks like to you in the moment. There is this domain of adventure and uncertainty when we tell the truth. We talked about it as a long-term strategy, and we concluded basically with it is not only a long-term life strategy to tell the truth, but also interesting when it comes to content generation by simply telling stuff you only can tell, and you do that by telling the truth. Next one. 10 simple 1000x improvements by Sam Ovens. Not drinking alcohol. Second, sleeping 8 to 9 hours. Third, eating healthy. Fourth, meditating 20 minutes. Fifth, not caring what people think. Sixth, exercise. Seventh, reading books. Eighth, not watching news/politics. Ninth, letting go for social conventions. And 10th, developing discipline. Now, there are obviously many of them that could be interesting to tackle here. And by the way, guys, this is originally the content is from Sam Ovens, the CEO and founder of school.com and consulting.com. Or at least he founded that and now sold consulting.com and is now doing school.com. It's like a platform for communities. I believe this will be the future. This will be the biggest, or is already the biggest platform when it comes to communities. Maybe Facebook is bigger currently, but this is it, I believe. School.com, you can check it out. And he, in this list I just outlined, which got posted by Tay Dosa, number 8 was not watching news and politics. And I want to hit hard on that one and explore a little bit some things I believe I have to say about that. So, when it comes to news and politics, I realized that this is a pretty ongoing thing. The news never stops. I think this happens already many decades, hundreds and hundreds of years. The news is rolling and doing their job. Like they are reporting about stuff that happens today, this week, whatever. And apparently, obviously, there is a lot of negativity associated with the news or reading the news because that's their bread and butter, basically. Like stuff, negative stuff, not all of it, but to a huge proportion, negative stuff that happens on this planet. And they report about it, which is totally fine. Everybody can do what they want, obviously. Point being here, I realized that if I consume all day long like negative content, I'm not feeling well. Like I don't see the world pretty positively or through an optimistic lens. And I realized that if you can't control something, don't talk about it or don't consume it. It helps to focus on what is within your control if you avoid the news or politics. And then I remember recording a podcast episode together with Sabrina Steiner. Was a German podcast episode actually, so for those of you speaking German, maybe interesting. And something that what we discuss is exactly that. Why we stopped consuming the news. And what I think I told there was that I stopped consuming the news. That first of all, if I consume all day long negative information, obviously this will translate to more negativity in my life and how I perceive certain things. And then also people would come up with this like claim that, okay, if you don't consume the news, how do you want to know what's going on in the world? Fair point. But I realized that by reading long form content, in other words, books, long form podcasts, stuff like that, I'm way more informed about what's happening because I understand better why people behave in a certain way and why not. So I believe reading is a way better medium long term to understand humanity, to understand people and life in general than consuming the news. Because look at it, if you consume, and I'm just telling my experience, if I consume short form content like the news, for instance, like let's say I pull up a news journal and there is a 2-minute article written and I read that, and after it in 2 minutes I don't know more, I don't know less. It's like an empty room basically. And especially in the world of information overload, what do I want to do with that right now? Like, okay, a car accident happened and I'm from the bottom of my heart obviously sorry that this happened. But right now, I can't change that. This is what happened. But if I would consume all day just that, I think this has a significant impact on my life. And I don't want this impact because the nature of it is most likely negative. So, to wrap this more or less up, is if something is out of my control, so the news or certain political stuff, or a lot of it, almost all of it, is out of my control, why bothering about it? Or why not bothering? Why should I talk about it? Because that has no relevance. Let's better focus and talk about stuff that I have under my direct control, like things like building my business, being a productive human being, and thinking about cool ideas how I can build a great business. I think like that I can contribute way more to society than actually speaking about stuff that are completely outside of my control. It's like the weather, it's like this thing of I understand, and then sometimes I ask this question to have maybe a small talk, and that's okay, I would say, but it's like the weather is also something out of my control. Whether it's nice weather, bad weather, I don't really care. Quite frankly, I really, really rarely check the weather app on my iPhone because I just don't care, really. It's just like it happens and that's fine. I want to use this brain power that I have for things that are high in value, like my business, my work at Swisspreneur as a syndicate manager, for instance, stuff that are productive. Or on the flip side, for my family, I want to be there. But if I think all day about the news, what happened there and there and there, this can really get to it, like this can use up a lot of energy, and I think I can use this energy better for productive stuff like business, like a beautiful family. Yeah, I hope you get the gist here. Yo, Zenith Nation, quick break. Each Sunday, I write a free newsletter called Zenith Sunday. In it, I share simple lessons I learn about doing better work and living a better life. It's short, easy to read, and costs nothing. If you would like a little boost each week, sign up below. And now, back to the show. Next one. Again, quote by Chris Williamson. This episode is filled up with his quotes, but he's a great one. He's a great podcaster and a great writer, from my perspective. He wrote, "If your body is made up of things you put into your mouth, your mind is made of things you put into your eyes and ears. Your content diet should be spirulina for the soul, not fast food for your amygdala." So let's take that apart. We just talked about news and stuff like that. So first of all, he said, if your body's made up of things you put into your mouth, obviously, if we eat a healthy diet, most likely we feel better. At least I feel great and I eat pretty healthy. And then the second part was, your mind is made of things you put into your eyes and ears. And this is, again, associated with what I just shared, like consuming the news, consuming short-form content that harms your ability to focus. This is, I would say, similarly, or to, I don't know if it's similar, but to a pretty high level, this is really, really important as well. Not only obviously how we live, lifestyle stuff, but obviously also what we consume is so important. And I give you another example apart from news and stuff like that. If I listened for, let's say, I hit the gym on a regular basis 5 times per week. And I had some periods where I listened every single workout through loud music. And after a certain period, it's like, I don't want to listen anymore. It's like dopamine overstimulation, basically. But if I then stop listening to music and replace that with podcasts or simply nothing at all, I don't listen to anything, and then come back to something, the pleasure is way greater. And therefore, I also want to make sure that what I listen, what I watch is some kind of productive. And I believe listening to a long form podcast is a wonderful thing to do. At least it works great in my case because I work out, I listen to a podcast, I have done 2 great activities at the same time. One thing is I worked out, I exercised, which is good for my overall health. But also interesting, I learned something new. And while listening to that, I got some new ideas that I maybe will express then in a newsletter or use in a podcast episode. So therefore, this analogy which I brought up a few, I guess in the last two episodes, I'm not sure. It's like a short, like if we consume like short form content and news and all that thing, that's like fast food. But actually, that's not really good for our brain, for our amygdala. We should make sure that we create content to the extent that it's actually spirulina for the soul, I would argue, like similar to Chris Williams, what he said. So long story short, I would say being cautious about or being intentional what we consume is also powerful, whether it's like replacing short form stuff, news with long form stuff is, I think, one of the changes I made in my life that had a huge impact over the past 6-ish years. So then let's move on to the next one. This is more like a business post, which I reposted on my X account. It's a quote by Alex Ramosi. If you're going to bring on a partner, they got to have TEAM, team. This acronym stands basically for time you don't have, experience you don't have, assets you don't have, money you don't have. Pick one or more. I just found it a really helpful framework when choosing with whom I want to work with in a business context. They either should have time I don't have, so they can do work I currently can't because I'm already working 14 hours a day. Second, experience you don't have, so they have deep domain knowledge in a particular area. Let's say you want to go into private equity and you need someone who knows about private equity. So you partner up with someone. And this is actually what we currently do with the AI startup. Then the third one is assets you don't have. Maybe this person owns something you don't have. And similar, the last one is then money you don't have. So this person can support you with funds, for instance. So I found that really helpful, and maybe that serves you well when choosing to partner with someone. Do they have something of those 4 points or nothing? And then you can come up with your decision. I use that currently as my, let's say, guiding rule how to choose a partner. Next one. If you're afraid of blushing during a presentation, deliberately tell yourself, let's see how red can I get. This shifts your mindset and reduces the anxiety that fuels the fear. So, why I'm bringing this up, I recently reread the wonderful, great book, Man's Search for Meaning, written by Viktor E. Frankl. I highly recommend reading this book. And it taught me, obviously, many different things, which I shared also in past episodes. But one thing he shares in this book is how to deal with compulsion. And like compulsion, this is this. How would I define that? I can describe it like that. If you are checking something over and over and over again without letting to go that, like if you are closing the door and you are checking if you really locked the door 10 times and you're still not sure if you checked it. And there are many other examples. And he had an interesting strategy how to deal with that. And that is thinking the exact opposite. So let's give you an example. Like you're on the stage, you're getting a little bit red because you give this presentation. You can tell yourself, instead of avoiding becoming red, you say, I want to get as red as I humanly possibly can. Or another guy, I think that was written in the book, I'm not 100% sure, but a guy was sweating a lot when giving a presentation, or in general, I'm not sure. And the way how he defeated that was by telling himself, I will sweat now as much as I humanly possibly can. Like I will sweat everything out. And all of a sudden, he stopped struggling with sweating so much. And I found it a helpful thing because I'm somebody who is really high in conscientiousness. I want to do things right. And I had a tendency sometimes to check things multiple times, sometimes even today. But I have now a good strategy how to deal with that. For instance, one thing that I had a compulsion tendency was checking the stove if it's really turned off. So I'm cooking, then I turn off the stove, and I would check it few times if it's really off. And how I overcome that in today's life, in my life today, is basically when applied to checking the stove, I tell myself I will do now the worst possible job at checking the stove. And that leads me to my rule, which is I only am allowed to check it once. So I'm allowed to check it once, and I trust myself that I have done a good job. And that puts on me kind of a constraint. And over time, it becomes reinforcing because if I applied that rule for the first time in the past, I was successful. And then I was successful a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And all of a sudden, I'm not really struggling with that anymore on a consistent basis. So, long story short, let's try to put that into a actionable framework. If you are struggling with compulsion, think first for yourself like, okay, I will do now exactly the opposite. So instead of, like in my case, I want to check the stove properly, that everything is turned off and that the house will not burn down, hopefully, I will do the worst possible job at it. Or another example could be like I'm on stage, I need to give a presentation, and I'm afraid of getting red, that my face gets red. I tell myself I'm getting now as I try to get as red as humanly possible. Or said differently, I want to sweat as much as humanly possible. And then, interestingly, most of the time, the likelihood is higher that the opposite will actually occur, that you will not sweat, not get red, or in my case, checking the stove only once. And if you want to put that strategy on steroids, if you, especially like me, had sometimes a tendency to check things multiple times, you have this one rule, you check it once, and then you have done a good job basically, and you trust yourself and you do it multiple times again and again, and it becomes reinforcing, and you make this out basically a habit. I hope that helps for everybody had struggles in the past with compulsion. And some rules, yeah, small rules but really impactful. And now let's move on to the last post I want to discuss for today, which is consume the exact opposite content of what you believe to be true to challenge your beliefs and opinions constantly. It's hard, but it makes you more receptive to new ideas. So, maybe you have experienced that. You have a strong belief in a particular domain. You think X or Y is true. But then what I found pretty valuable, especially nowadays where you have on social media sometimes really those strong extremes, somebody's only telling X, the other person Y, and they're going against each other. And what I found really helpful is sometimes consuming the exact opposite of what I believe, because it helps me to identify like um, stuff I don't know, or I figure out that my own reasoning, my rationale was flawed, or I identify certain blind spots I haven't considered yet. And it helps me to widen my horizon, basically. And I like to remember this experiment that a good friend of mine told me, David. Um, Actually, I need to. Long time we didn't speak, but he basically shared with me a valuable experiment, which is when you have certain beliefs, have a debate about them, obviously, with somebody who maybe disagrees. But then switch the tables, try to defend exactly the opposite position of what you think to test or what you think to be true, to test your blind spots and rational and learn something new. And that is so yeah, it puts you in a really uncomfortable position because now you need to defend exactly the opposite of what you think to be true. But sometimes it's really good to see things from a different angle, although you not entirely, let's say, think those are true or right or whatever. And Although hard, I think long term is a pretty good strategy. And a good, let's say, requisite that this strategy might work is to assume that the person on the other side of the table might know something you don't. This really helps to open your horizon, or at least it did in my case. And the beauty is, if you follow this approach of you assume that someone knows something that you don't, and you want to learn something, ultimately you can learn from anybody something. It doesn't really matter if it's in a positive or negative context. Like, you can obviously learn, let's say, from a successful entrepreneur who does a great job at raising money, for instance, for his tech company. The cool thing is that you can learn that. You can learn, obviously, you talk to that person and it's a positive experience, but also you can learn something from somebody who is acting negatively or behaving negatively. I will explain you that. So imagine you bought a product, a service, and you are now inside. Let's say you bought a coaching program, but the customer success team is pretty bad. They reply late. You need to follow up multiple times, and you're not really satisfied. You, as a business owner, in case you are, could learn something from that. Basically, you learn how not to do customer success. And then you can actually, you know precisely what you shouldn't do. And then you can flip that into a positive and say, instead of replying late, always reply in 60 seconds or 10 minutes. Or multiple follow ups becomes no follow up. I answer every single message from my customers on time, and they don't need to follow up with me. You see the point. And I found it really helpful to just keep an open mind. Now, circling back to what I said initially, to sometimes consume content from the opposition, one of the most uncomfortable things to do, but long term wise, so valuable, I believe. And you can test yourself really in a example like, and you don't necessarily need to have a conversation. You can also do right now, if you're, let's say, I said certain things in this podcast, or you listened to another podcast and learned there are certain things. Now search for exactly the opposite opinion about that and see what they have to tell you. And maybe you will find out some interesting facts, information, etc. So I hope that helps. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will tune in the next episode. Cheers.